All right. We are live. Mr. Hawker, how are you doing tonight? Actually, how should we refer to you?
You can refer to me as Otto. I'm not really you don't have to call me Mister or anything. I'm not really worthy of that honor.
All right, fair enough. So, well, it might be force of habit. We'll see what happens. All right. So, you're going to come on tonight and talk with us about horses and figure out what's going on with that. But right now, I'm going to open up with a little bit of this idea that Europeans and horses go together like peanut butter and jelly. This has been going on for millennia. Prior to Christ, this goes all the way back, if you want to talk about Scythian and moving into European identity, what that meant, what happened coming out of the Eurasians, so on and so forth. One of the easy ways to jump into this is post Christ, the idea of how Europe was changing, different Christian identity and whatnot. There's an old English poem called The Wanderer, which is already referencing horses. This is roughly the 7th century AD. It's an old English poem. And it's tying back, where's the horse and the rider? Now, most of y'all are probably familiar with that idea because one of our favorite daggum movies and book series quotes that, and that's Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings. So that was going on. The horses early in the 7th century. After that, or excuse me, yeah, after that, you're going to follow it throughout our history, the Hussar traditions, particularly over in Eastern Europe, but then throughout Europe, you still have very much a focus on mounted cavalry and an application of horses. Of course, there's issues with Agincourt and how horses were defeated not only at the Battle of Tours and Charles Martel, issues with Charlemagne, but you've got that throughout intra-European fights and conquests and figuring out who is who. So I want you to grab hold of horses, get excited about them. We're going to be focusing a little bit on their history, a little bit of how they came into the U.S. and basically changed the course of history on the North American continent. But before we jump into that, I'm going to read you something. This is Kipling. This one is Together, England at War. When the horse and rider each can trust the other everywhere, it takes a fence and more than a fence to pound that happy pair. For the one will do what the other demands, although he is beaten and blown. And when it is done, they can live through a run that neither could face alone. When crew and captain understand each other to the core, it takes a gale, and more than a gale, to put their ship ashore. For the one will do what the other commands, although they are chilled to the bone, and both together can live through weather that neither could face alone. When king and people understand each other past a doubt, it takes a foe and more than a foe to knock that country out. For the one will do what the other requires as soon as the need is shown, and hand in hand they can make a stand which neither could make alone. This wisdom had Elizabeth and all her subjects too, for she was theirs and they were hers, as well the Spaniard knew. For when his grim armada came to conquer the nation and throne, why, back to back they met in attack that neither could face alone. It is not wealth, nor talk, nor trade, nor schools, nor even the vote will save your land when the enemy's hand is tightening round your throat, but a king and a people who thoroughly trust each other and all is done can sleep in their bed without any dread, for the world will leave 'em alone. Again, that was Together, England at War by Rudyard Kipling. What I thought was interesting about that poem is the idea that he starts out the very idea when horse and rider each can trust the other everywhere. This is a common through line that, again, extends all throughout European history. We are the people of the horse and the hound. Tonight we're going to focus on the horse, but I think here in the future we might even be digging into the hound. Is that a fair comment there, Otto?
Yeah, I think it's actually something worth pursuing, especially in regards to North America. we see the development of multiple types of dog breeds specifically for hunting. And some of these dog breeds, like I'll give you an example. The Plotz Hound was made in Western North Carolina by one guy who came over from Germany as a contract hunter for the British. It was him and his brother died. And so this one guy was here basically by himself, like a 17, 18-year-old man, and somehow ended up making like a very rare and very expensive bear dog, hunting dog breed.
Absolutely. Did you happen to see my last video that I put up? It wasn't a live stream, but an actual video.
Yes, I got to watch a little bit of it when you're talking about maybe watch is the right word, listen. I was at the gym trying to get a workout in and I tuned into it. Um, I knew it was a lot about DNA and genetics and things of that nature, but I didn't get to finish it all the way through, so I apologize in advance.
Oh no, you're good. So that was before this one. That one was the one on a HBD, I imagine, and it combining with Dungeons and Dragons. Does that sound like the right one?
Um, I think it was whatever your last video you was that you
So
uploaded. I know I've listened to you with the one with John Slaughter before.
sure. So my very last one that I did, I don't remember. Maybe it was Tuesday that one went live. It was or excuse me, posted, not live, but that one was actually on American cur dogs in the American homestead. And so your mountain curs, your blue lacy, catahoulas, and all that. Uh, you start jumping into plots and all that. You are right up my alley.
And I don't own a dog, but if I was to own a dog, I would want something more like a cur or a one of those kind of dogs. I mean, I could use it for hunting. I bird hunt, I squirrel hunt, I deer hunt. Um, I don't bear hunt. We don't have bears to hunt in Alabama. We have bears, not a lot of them, but you could just having a hunting dog as a companion when you go out in the woods is just something kind of magical about it. Bonding with this animal that in some ways has more wood sense than people do.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a huge fan of cur dogs. Not to get too far off the point tonight, but I am a huge fan of cur dogs. I think they are very hard to beat when you're talking about the total package. There's some other ones I like. I like Rots. I like Schnauzers, but the cur dogs are fantastic dogs, and I could talk about them all night. But tonight, go ahead and get us into horses. I'm going to let you take the lead, and then I'll just jump in if anything sounds interesting.
Okay, well, so when discussing horses, we need to beat a dead horse quite literally. First off, which is that horses are a product of Indo-European culture or Proto-Indo-European culture. So the first horses that were tamed were actually tamed by this group called the Botai culture somewhere in Kazakhstan. And I'm not too aware if the Botai were Indo-European or not. I haven't really in all my research and things I've done just in concerning like this kind of history of horse development. I I've never really thought to ask are the bow tie Indo-European. And also a quick note about the bow tie culture is that when they tamed these horses, they they were not I don't want to say they failed, but they at some point something happened where they lost the ability to maybe not ability might not even be the right word. Basically, that culture quit taming horses. They quit domesticating horses, and that line of horses today is the Przewalski horse, or however you pronounce it. Um. Anyway, continuing along the storyline here. So the first continuum of horse domestication that leads to today is going to be the Yamnaya culture, I believe, and they are going to be in Ukraine. I think it's Western Ukraine on the steppe, Pontic steppe. They're going to tame horses, and as we know, these are a nomadic, a yeah, nomadic culture that, very much lives off of warfare, high protein diets and lifestyles, and herding. So they're herding things like horses, sheep, and cattle. And these horses are going to help them expand across Europe. We know that Western European society was founded by the corded ware culture. Um, I'm gonna be careful here because it's kind of always been confusing to me. Um, what I'm about to say might be wrong, so give me some mercy on this, please, to those listening. But the corded ware are not Yamnaya. They are a related culture that more or less had the same blood as Yamnaya people. They were like cousins, I guess you could say. And the corded ware are going to basically move into the Balkans. Regardless, they're going to have a lot of similarities with them, and they're going to bring that horse warrior culture to Europe, Western Europe, more specifically.
All right, perfect. So we're going back. We've got corded ware, we've got Imnaya, we've got the Przewalski, well, the precursor or whatever to it. How is this affecting? How is this affecting European, or I guess Proto-European? If we're going to say that the corded ware moved in and started affecting the European cultures, how exactly did all that work out? Are you aware of which cultures were impacted or which breeds started coming out of that?
Um, Not so much about horse breeds, but I know in particular that the what I'm going to umbrella size the Neolithic cultures of Western Europe. I know that there were some hunter gatherers. And there were also the Neolithic farmers. I believe, for example, let's see, the Iceman descends from these people. They were from Anatolia and they came into Europe. Now, going into the Indo European spread into Europe, this is going to be about 3,000 years ago, roughly. These cultures are essentially wiped out or assimilated into Indo European culture. Um, Concerning horses at this time, I believe the horses are obviously a lot shorter. They're a lot more stockier animals. And I'm not saying that they exactly look like a Przewalski horse. I can't pronounce it. Um, but they're going to be a lot more of a stocky, shorter build. And yeah, probably something more like a fjord horse than they would be like a Missouri Foxtrotter. And so it's going to take, years of developing, horses to get to what we look at them today. Now, we know that the, Indo-Europeans invented the wheel and the cart, and that these horses, were basically capable of pulling chariots. We look at, similar groups like the, I believe it's the Anasievo culture in more like the Eastern steppe. These people are going more into like China and Iran. These are basically like the ancestors of Iranic people. They have chariots. There's another one, Andronovo. That's what I'm thinking of. In Santasha, they have chariots. They have war chariots, and it's likely that these Indo-European people coming in were able to ride horses, but for battle they were probably using chariots, much in the way that Caesar recounts of the Celts in Britain. That basically their champions or elites would ride into battle on these chariots. They'd ride around and throw some javelins. They would dismount to fight on foot. If they, had to flee, they would get back on the chariots and they would flee. So that's probably what we're seeing, but we also might not be seeing a lot of combat. We might just be seeing a lot of just widespread coming in and laying down the law. Because if we know anything about these Neolithic populations, they're much like us in the modern day sense that they are basically nutritionally starved of anything serious. These cultures were living off of a lot of like bread and versus warrior dudes who are coming off eating, beef, mutton, red meat in high
Well,
protein diets.
and their horses. One of the things we forget is a lot of times the people groups that were using the horses to move through the continents, they weren't just using them as a form of transportation, but they were also using them as a food source. And so those that were less tractable, less trainable, or that frankly weren't good with their conformation, oftentimes would be eaten. They weren't just tossed aside, but they would be eaten rather than put into service. And
And I
then
think oh, go ahead,
what?
go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's fine.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's a fair assumption because we look at, especially in Germanic civilization, we're going to see a holdover of eating horse. And it's something that, like in Iceland today is still a delicacy. I had the opportunity to try some, though it wasn't exactly like how I would want my horse cooked. It was raw and it had like what I presume was wasabi on it, and it was just nasty. There was no taste; it burned. But my grandfather had some horse when he was in Europe in the military, and I believe he said it was actually really good. And I've known some other people that have had like horse steak, horse, haunch, something like that, that equivalent, and they say it was good, and I imagine it is.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it might have been in the '90s that Aldi's got in trouble in the U.S. a little bit because I think at one point they might have been carrying horse meat. That might be headcanon though. I'm trying to remember. One
Well,
of the
that's
other
not as
things.
bad as I heard there was a Burger King somewhere in California that was serving like lion meat, and I don't know if that was mountain lion or like African lion.
How would you even get a hold of that? Like the horse meat
Um,
makes sense.
I I was just a kid when I read this. Probably a lot of backwater shady dealing. Now that you're saying that, it makes me doubt the reality of it being true. Uh,
Well, I
but
mean, it might have been. I just the logistics of that sound wild.
yeah, I imagine it would be because I mean, it's just like you're doing a little prank to like, it'd be easier if you're trying to prank people or, be whatever to people. You'd, think, oh, serve them like mealworm meat or like bug meat or like fake meat. And it's like, no, you're actually giving them like probably pretty nutritious big cat meat. So it's kind of odd, It's kind of expensive for a prank if you're just trying to, get one over on some people.
Fair enough. I know as you were talking a few minutes ago, one of the things I was thinking of is once horses were finally, we won't even say quite domesticated, but once they were being managed, actively managed, and in some way being utilized. So it wasn't just managing the herds, but it was actually using them to some degree. People had to figure out how they were going to use them, whether it was going to be with chariots, whether it was going to be attempting to ride them. This is all sort of a technology as it comes about. So one of the things that reminded me of is when horses finally come back to North America, because we're burying the lead, but there were no horses in North America until roughly 500 years ago. And so prior to that, and then up until the various tribal nations saw horses being utilized here in the States, they had no understanding of them. And you see, even after they saw the Spanish using them, the Apache in particular, they never actually fought off of horseback. The Comanches did, but the Apaches would use them solely as transportation. Then they would dismount and move to squad level infantry tactics. They didn't actually fight from horseback again, like the Comanche, the Sioux, the Cheyenne. Excuse me, I might be a little bit off on the Cheyenne.
No, you're absolutely right, and you got to think about the environment. Now, somebody to ask about that environment itself would be Thomas Wayne Riley at the old Southwest. I believe this is YouTube channel, but also, that land is, easy. It's more, rocky. It's mountainous. It's hilly. There's a lot of logistics and maintaining, not just people but horses. And so I imagine that these Apache, it made sense to use them as transportation when the ground's not exactly the best for, full on cavalry charges. And you can just ride up over a hill and get in there's a term they have for them, like a canyon or valley or a crevice in like a mountainside. And you can basically like hide out there. So there's not exactly a need um, for full on warfare. You know what I mean? Like full on like, cavalry warfare.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. They weren't working so much on the plains as they were in the southwest and northern Mexico area. And so that's going to be an entirely different environment than northern Oklahoma up into Nebraska, Kansas, and so on.
Yes, it very much is. And that's what's going to lend that, the environment and also the lifestyle of the Lakota, the Lakota Sioux, the Comanche, the Blackfeet, is that these people are going to be living off buffalo, and they're migratory hunter gatherers. And so when they find the horse, it only is a further necessity to their lifestyle. It's going to make things a lot easier. It's like having electricity, I guess. Whereas these other tribes in the Southwest are more stationary. They're agricultural, believe it or not, for that, and they have a history really of being like not just sedentary, but building cities. And I don't want to go, too into that because that's definitely not an area of my expertise, and it's something I'm really learning about right now. But groups like the Anasazi and things like that, they were living, these basically building cities in the desert. And that I'm just going to quit speaking on that particular topic because there's like I said, Thomas Wayne Riley, somebody that could really get you some information on that, and I would rather him have that than me.
Fair enough. All right, so let's go back to Europe. What goes on? How does the horse play into European history? What are some big highlights of horses, and then how does that affect the U.S.? Because if we go back far enough, horses at one point were walking around in the U.S. They, the scientific explanation is that they got hunted out post Ice Age, or what was the? It doesn't matter. For some reason, they had gone extinct, and so we still have them over in Europe. And again, just hit the highlights and get us up to the point where we're going to be coming over to North America and bringing the horse, the return of the horse.
Well, I I would like to not just give the highlights. I would like to give like I said, I'm spurring out right now if you can't tell. And I would like
Go
to
for
give
it.
okay, so you give me permission, I'll go. So let's start with North America. Yes, let's start with North America. So the Ice Age ends, what we want to call the Ice Age. And now also for the record, and I don't know really species, but if you believe mainstream science or evolutionary and plot lines, you'll know that horses evolve from these like small little horses, like little, like the size of like a cur dog, and they grow up very big. Anyway, so after the last ice age or sometime in that, these horses in North America are hunted to extinction by Native Americans. Um, we, number one, can say this because we're finding evidence of horses here, but when Europeans arrive, there are no wild horses. Funny enough, on that note, I was listening to a video in prepping for research for this discussion, and there was a guy who was claiming that Native Americans actually had horses before the Europeans arrived, and that basically the Europeans weren't able to like keep, I guess, an account of these horses more or less, and that these horses got lost in the herds of European horses. And it's a cool thing to think about, but it's a crackpot theory. We know from just Europeans arriving here, they didn't see any horses. We know Native American hunting habits actually were rather kind of thorough in the sense of they would actually deplete a lot of game. There's this whole and it's kind of a Western centric, as in Great Plains esque kind of idea that the Native Americans were like preserving these animal populations But you look at things like jaguars, bison. Uh, when Europeans arrived here, their populations were already kind of lower, especially like in the southeast. And we believe that has to do with Native Americans just hunting them, killing them, whatever. We also know that the Native Americans were burning down forests in mass in places like Virginia, um, and it was killing deer. There was a lot of unregulated behavior towards animals with the natives, and that's why I believe I don't know the exact year, but Virginia was one of the first places in America to pass a hunting law, which basically made deer season sometime in the fall. So to me, that's enough evidence to say that there were no horses left in America when Europeans got here. So now, oh, go
Sure,
ahead,
because
go ahead, go ahead.
well, just one of the arguments would be that had horses been here, this game would have already been hunted to extinction, as, like you said, other populations had already been.
Yes, more than likely so. Or on the Great Plains, which is horses were if you believe in evolution and you don't believe in a divine creator, which to me all this stuff points more towards a divine creator than not. That's why I'm a Christian. Uh, I think that we see that the American environment, what do you want to call the American steppe, is a great place. It's the natural birthplace of these horses. So I think when God created the world, He kind of set this to be the place that they would originate from and ultimately make a grand return to. So I say let's jump on a boat and go back to Europe. So we're leaving Ellis Island right now, and we're landing in Normandy. Okay. Anyway, so we're back in Europe, and it's about 3,000 years ago. We see Indo-European civilization spreading across Europe. They're going to take the horse with them everywhere, and we're going to see this horse warrior culture establish itself firmly in all corners of Europe. One of the first places I would like to actually go to is Mycenaean Greece. We're going to see examples of chariots, and not exactly Mycenaean in time period, but in Homer's Odyssey, not Odyssey. Well, he did write the Odyssey, but the Iliad, which I have a copy of right here. He is going to call. Let's see, where is it at? I want to find the specific quote, but they refer to Agamemnon, Agamemnon. His name always trips me up. Agamemnon, as a breaker of horses, and I believe there's also some they might call Menelaus a breaker of horses too. But that seems
Yeah, they
to
talk about Hector and horses. It's an absolute through line.
yes, and so that and it talks about chariots. In fact, I think it talks about. Let's see, where is it at? I'm not gonna I'm not gonna really bother trying to find it because it's not really of. Let's see. Yes, here's a quote. Here's a quote. Let's see here. Let me think where to start so I can make this better. Let's see. Down through the bracing God sent night, it came like good Nestor in features, height, and build, the old king himself, and hovering at my head. The dream called me on. Still asleep, Agamemnon? The son of Atreus, that skilled breaker of horses. How can you sleep all night, a man weighed down with duties? So that implies, I think, in an idea that the nobles, were using horses, and we're seeing, archaeological evidence of this whole period of the Bronze Age and what I want to call the late Bronze Age and the Bronze Age collapse. That the nobility of all these empires basically fight off chariots, and they have horses pulling them. The Hyksos are going to bring that to Egypt, which there's theories the Hyksos are an Indo-European people. I don't know if there's any evidence genetically for that or not. They might be a Middle Eastern people that got horses from Indo-Europeans and used them, much like Native Americans getting horses from Europeans and then using them against Europeans. Um, yeah, we see, there's a big link between like the noble fighting class and horses and chariots. We're gonna even see that in regards to, and I don't have any like actual written documented works on it, but we're gonna see when the Romans talk about fighting Germanics. Uh, Unlike the Celts in Britain, which Caesar said had like chariots, the Germanics at the time of the Cimbrian War are noted to be very good horsemen. I believe they're noted to have ornate decorations on their horses in the form of wild beasts. So imagine that how you like. I know there's also this idea that the nobles and the people on horseback, they would wear very elaborate helmets. There's also a tactic. I think Caesar might actually describe this himself, but it might be Tacitus. But they talk about that these Germanic horsemen would basically would have like a, I wouldn't call them like a squire, but they have a runner with them. And the idea is that the cavalrymen would basically like charge or fight, fight on horseback, and he would have a man on foot that would run with the horse and would throw javelins. I believe he would throw javelins, but they, case in point, they would have an infantry guy with them that would basically keep up with them to help support them in combat. So, and here's the deal too with speaking in Northern European terms. Some Northern European peoples were good with horses, in the sense of warfare, and some were not. We're you know, Anglo-Saxons, an example, they're not really known to be like a horse people in the sense of, fighting on horseback, but they're known to be good horsemen. There's a difference between riding a horse and riding one into battle and, developing your military culture around that. And obviously where the Saxons come from in, northern Germany, southern Denmark, we don't think of that as exactly like the horse rearing country. And that's not saying that they didn't have horses, they didn't use them, but to have a war horse is not just, getting a horse, jumping on it, and riding to an extent. And the European mindset of a war horse, it's going to be something that charges into an enemy. It charges into a formation. It goes in close. It goes in for the kill. Whereas we see in Native American, culture, they're essentially going to use the horse in a more of a skirmish skirmish way. They might stay on horse, but they're going to shoot you from a distance. They're going to pelt you. They may charge you, but they're at that time too. Also, we're seeing the use of guns, and so that's going to make horse warfare completely different. So if Europeans came to North America in a pre-gunpowder context, there might, we might see Native Americans, cavalry charging in massive lances, which I'm sure happened at some point. Um, but it's not, that's like, that would probably be the minority. And I see where somebody's commenting, yes, the development of horses is going to be, how can I say this? When we think about the development of horses, a lot of it is based off of a military history of horses. So let's get out of the dark. Let's get out of the antiquity and get more into like medieval Europe with horses. And I promise we're going to go back to North America here in a bit. So,
No, you're good. This is great.
okay, so we first start seeing so people like the Goths are going to use horsemen. We see this idea of the Germanic people using horsemen. We know the Romans, are good horsemen. Uh, we know the Greeks employ horses because, like, specifically, and I said we're getting out of antiquity, but we think of places like Thessaly, the Salian horsemen, and Macedonia. These are places that can, are more like flat plains, and they basically can rear these well-bred horses. They have a lot of good food to eat. and they have flat, ground to run upon. It's easy terrain, and it's going to allow for more people to train with horses and train in formation, things like that, necessary for war. And so going to I say the late dark, what we're going to call the late dark ages, so about the time of the Franks. I'm not too aware of the Franks or the French really winning at Troyes because of horses. I'm more aware of them winning actually at Troyes. I think that's how you pronounce it. You pronounce it as Tours, but I try to sometimes use the French. So at Tours, Troyes, whatever you want to call it.
You're a
There's
braver man than me.
there's some evidence, I believe, that actually what won the battle for the Franks really is that they were in such a tight infantry formation that they were basically able to fight off these rabbles of Arabs. And that, they also describe these Franks as actually being more like berserkers than like, noble knights that we think of at the time of Charlemagne. Now going, towards the time of Charlemagne, we see that Charlemagne is, basically inherits this, for that time, vast empire. And I'm kind of I say cliff note, spark noting it to an extent. But he's got this massive empire, and he has to maintain that, and he doesn't have a, like a Roman. I was thinking of like a specific like Roman period, but he doesn't have like Pax Romana levels of a military. They have a feudal military. Um, Not everybody serves in the military, which and not everybody served in the Roman military, but there's not this like large amount of soldiers to use and go around. And so Charlemagne, has to keep control of this vast empire. So that's going to be kind of like the main crux of the horsemen. And now I believe the Franks had a tradition of coming from, more like, continental Germany. They had a tradition of fighting on horseback or being decent horsemen. Could be wrong on that. But that and taking Gaul, it's definitely going to be, Gaul being a Roman province, a heavily Romanized one. There's definitely going to be already a horse culture there per se. And as we know, France is also a good place to raise horses at. So they're, going to do that. And it's going to, Charlemagne fights these far flung campaigns from, Italy all the way up back to, original Saxon territory and Schleswig-Holstein, all the way down to Spain. And that's going to involve a lot of, horses and transportation, not just in the sense of war and transporting people, but supplies and material. And so he's gonna have that. Anyway, this, evolving culture, and we get into the Holy Roman Empire, and basically, at this time, the Magyars are a huge, huge threat. And I think the Magyars are probably more influential on this stuff than what we lend them credit to. Give me a second.
All right. Well,
Okay,
he's
I'm
working
back.
on.
I'm back. Sorry,
Okay.
I just had to mute for a second. So, where was I starting at? The Magyars, yes. So, I saw one time in a book that the main reason why these European armies evolved in these like horse knights is because of Viking raids and people having to go basically to fight one of the other. And sure, there's some that plays some kind of element into it, but the Magyars are a entirely basically horseback army. They are, step archers, and so they are raiding and pillaging Germany. And a lot of people think Germany is like this mountainous country, whatever. Not no, a lot of it's flat. And also at this time too, Europe is not exactly a it's not the dark Wald, of Odin worshippers exactly. It's a it's being a cultivated country with villages and churches and things like that. And these Magyars essentially sweep in, they roll in from the eastern steppe, and they start massacring people en masse. And they're going in places like Bohemia, um, places that we wouldn't really associate with the Frankish Empire, but were part of it, or part of it in the sense of, well, let me be specific. At this time, there's a split, and I'm not going to get into details because I don't really know them off the top of my head. But what you're going to see is basically the formation of the Kingdom of France on one side, and the formation of what is the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, on the other. And we're going to see people like Otto the Great, basically they have to fight the Magyars on horseback. And so they, to fight this, horseback threat, you also have to adapt with horses. And it's not so much you have to charge them when they're, shooting a bow on horseback, and you have to chase after them on horse with a spear. It's more about they can move around quickly. You have to move around quickly. So that, and then just the creation of the feudal system is basically going to bring it down to that these, oath sworn elite, or oath sworn warriors of continental Europe, are increasingly going to be pushed to be more cavalry troops. We actually even see in Germany there is a class of what I would call bond soldiers called the ministeriales, and they are pretty much like peasants who's I'm going to be using kind of like dummy terms here, but they're basically peasants who their job as a peasant is to be a knight. They're basically not free. They're not bound. They're not freedmen. They are peasants who are forced to be knights. And you're going to see kind of the opposite in Spain, where you're going to see these basically peasants offered knighthood and, promotion if they can essentially get them some bare bones equipment and move to dangerous places near the moors and fight. So anyway, we know that there's the 1066 invasion of England by William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, is going to establish a Normanno-Frankish line in the Kingdom of England. This is going to bring cavalry more or less to the British Isles. And I want to touch on this for a bit because it's important to us as Americans, because we are descendants of the British, whether we like that or not. That is our ancestors. If you want to search, look up more like border reavers. That might be a better example of what we're going to be talking about for a bit. So, even though William the Conqueror takes England with an army that is very powerful on horseback, the English aren't really known to be fighters on horseback. They do it in the times of Richard. They do it in the Crusade. They even do it in the 100 Years' War. But the kind of standard English battle practice is to fall back on two weapons, which is the bow and the bill. You can't have one without the other. We're going to see, the English kind of learned this fighting the Welsh and the Scottish with Edward Longshanks. They're going to basically learn that, hey, these horse armies can be defeated. And, when you get in the interior of England, yes, there's good horse country there in terms of movement. But when you're in like Wales and places like that, you can't exactly operate off a cavalry only army. Anyway, so the English army is going to take what they've learned from the fighting the Welsh and the Scots, and they're going to put it in the field in France. Now, at the same time, private, English knights, things like that, they're practicing their horse riding skills. But now, and this is why I kind of want to touch on the border reavers. Now, in the borderlands between England and Scotland, being a horseman is very important, and it's going to be a big part of warfare. So in the borderlands of England and Scotland, you have these what they call border reavers, and it's going to basically start at the same time as the English are learning to fight on foot in like the late 1200s, early 1300s. And these border reavers are pretty much people that, like I said, live on the border, and they identify with the Kingdom of England and Scotland, but sometimes they identify more with their family, with whoever they're sworn to. So you can have Englishmen on the side of the Scots. You can have Scots on the side of the English, theoretically, in this border region of Northumbria. And I believe Lothian is what the Scottish version would be. So these border reavers, they call them reavers because they're raiders. They're paid off to do cross border activity. There's feuds, and trust me, this is going to be important when we discuss America because these people are the ancestors of the Scotch Irish. Um, that's going to ruffle some feathers because some people think, oh, the Scotch Irish are they're Irish. No, this is where they come from. They come from the borderlands. I'm just give you this. If you're from the South, go take a look around and find the people that are Scotch Irish. They don't. A lot of them don't have Irish names, from what I tend to notice. They have English names. Now, I'm not saying that they're exactly English, but they are Anglo. Many of them, and so these people are going to master horse warfare, reaving. They're going to be hired to go fight in France. They're going to be hired by the Kingdom of Scotland. Um, there's going to be tons of action with them, and it basically involves that the borderland region is a hilly but open land, and you can travel a lot by horse. And so these people are going to use that to their advantage for these lightning raids. It's also good cattle raising country and sheep raising country. These people are going to be using that in the lifestyle, which is reaving, raiding. So it's going to be like Vikings on steroids in this place, which a lot of these people are descendants of Vikings too. So it kind of breeds into itself. So now let's get on the boat and head back to America. So we're going to be going to this. We're going to be going to Spain to depart on this voyage. So Spain is a huge tradition of horse culture. It comes from It comes from the Indo-Europeans. It comes from the Romans. It comes from the Moors. It comes possibly also some influence the Visigoths. But in Spain, they are going to have this heavy horse culture. Um, Before we get on the boat, and I promise we're about to go back to America and go closer in our time. There is a whole progress of the medieval period of military horse development. At the time of, let's say, Charlemagne and Richard the Lionheart, the kind of quintessential idea of a war horse is the Arabian style horse. And you can look up an Arabian horse. Kind of like a slender, a fast horse. It's meant to be quick. It can charge, things like that. These horses are going to be influenced a lot by the Moors coming in, things of that nature. It's adding to the stock of Franco Franco Gallo Franco horses that are being widespread throughout Europe, private purchased by the nobility for war. An example would be like the Camagüey horse. But anyway, and as the period evolves, going into more like the Hundred Years' War, the War of the Roses, things of that nature, Italian wars, war horses are being bred for a more stockier, meatier build, things like a charger. These horses are going to be trained to stomp, bite, kick, do whatever. They're mean. They call them destriers. So the destrier is a war horse, and it's going to develop. So when the conquistadors go, yes, that is an example of a late era medieval / Renaissance. Actually, go to this picture with the knight stabbing the guy on the horseback. It's going to be down there. Yeah. See, this is more of the period of where the Arabian is becoming more like a it's more like an Arabian. And this isn't exact, but that's kind of the style of horse, you would say, the ideal of a horse, a war horse. And that's going to progress into a more heavily armored, not heavily armored, yes, but more of a heavy bodied horse is going to come back. And that probably has to do with armor, the way of the war, how, things like the Hundred Years' War, when you're a French knight and you're fighting these English armies, you probably want a beefed up horse, not exactly a Shire horse, but you want a more beefed up horse because you want to have a this thing that can clash into heavily armored men, things like that. So conquistadors, they still have these, Spanish, more blood horses, Arabian style horses, and they're going to be bringing them into the New World. They're probably going to be, more stocky than like an Arabian, I would think, because when the Spanish get here, they fight people like the Aztecs. I believe there's an account of the Soto when they're fighting at Mabila. Horses are playing into that, and they're probably heavy horses, and that's probably why the natives are afraid of them. Is these horses they're bringing, not all of them, but the ones that they're fighting against are probably mean, burly dudes that they will bite you. I don't know if you know this. Yes, probably something. That's a shire, I think. So I think you get the idea. Probably go down to that left, go left, go left, go left, up that tan looking beige horse. I mean, both of them are good. That's probably like what the Spanish are bringing over, something more like that. And I guess it is. I mean, it's an Andalusian horse, but you get the idea. So that probably is why the natives fear these horses so much. They call them big deer. Now, obviously, an Arabian's bigger than a deer, but I think there's something about them seeing these beautiful, magnificent, yet dangerous, deadly creatures coming into the North American continent. Now, and this is where my memory starts to I kind of go off script in a bit. I'm not reading off a script, but you get the idea. So at some point during these Spanish excursions, probably De Soto, I know Christopher Columbus let some horses go. Cortez probably let some go. But horses are going to start to flee Spanish captivity or employment, whatever you want to word it as. If you're a PETA activist, you'd say captivity. And they're going to start escaping into the American wilderness, and natives are going to start catching a hold of them. I know, for example, in like the Southwest, so we're going back to the Southwest again, when the Spanish come in and they set up the encomienda system, it's illegal for Native Americans to ride horses. Some do because of, well, first off, just because there's a law in existence doesn't mean that it's going to, not be broken. But also, too, you have to have people work, use horses. It's just going to naturally happen. It's like, I think in like the antebellum period, it was illegal for, African Americans to ride horses. It's going to happen. Exceptions don't make the rules, but exceptions do happen. So these horses are, the native population is going to have contact with horses. There's also probably illegal horse trading going on with natives up in the plains. Now, before the Pueblo Revolt, there is, which I promise I'll touch on, the Spanish in, I believe, New Mexico or Arizona. I think it was Arizona. They actually record that they were attacked by natives on horseback. These being the Apache, and this is the first instance of horses being used by natives. And the problem with it is that there is no really account of the Spanish like trading. It's all up in the air because there's no history being written down from the native side. And so somehow they're getting a hold of horses, and which I imagine the horse trade is probably lucrative. I mean, we think of like these let's say like proverbial backwood Spanish farmers that are producing horses. They might be trading horses to the natives simply by by paying them off to not be raided, to not be attacked, to be on good terms with them. So it might not be just, oh, we trade you like buffalo skin for a horse. There might be a lot more to that. And anyway, so when the Great Pueblo Revolt happens, it essentially sets back Spanish colonialism in that part of America. I'm not too big of an expert on it, and like I said, talk about him again. Thomas Wayne Riley is somebody to check out on all the details and specifics. I do have an idea in my head of the historiography of this time, and essentially what is going to happen is that I don't think the Spanish are completely kicked out, but they are weakened. And the main point of tonight with this is that these horses are basically, let loose. Uh, Tons of them go. In the east, DeSoto is, and these horses are getting split up. We're going to see the tribes like the Chickasaw and Choctaw and the Creek get a hold of horses. What become those tribes? Because at the time when DeSoto was, and I know I'm bouncing all over the continent, but at the time, so let me go back west. So we're going to see the Spanish, basically when the Pueblo Revolt happens, lose control of some horses. They're going to get into the Native Americans. This is going to spread north, obviously. And this is how the Comanche, more than likely, are going to pick it up. And it's going to be just a trickle down effect, just like guns and, steel tools and weapons and things like that, metal weapons, tools. In the East, we don't really think of Native Americans in the Eastern woodlands having horses, but they do. Um, like I said, the what become the Creek, Chickasaw, and Choctaw are going to have horses. They even have their own word for horse, if I can find it, and it essentially means big deer. And I believe it is it's a word that starts with an I, but I believe it is like isubu or something. I'm gonna find it real quick because I didn't actually have this pulled up for the for
While
the
you're working on that, I'm actually going to make I'm going to jump in here. Part of what's going on too is the difference in agricultural trends and the difference in what the people that were landing in the New World were trying to achieve. The English, the English and how they would handle their livestock was very different from the Spanish when they came in. The Spanish would come in with much more rangier animals, and they would just set them out, let them start grazing, roaming about, and that's where you're getting your longhorns, your cracker cattle, your piney woods are all coming out from that original Spanish stock, and that's going to be here over on the eastern side. And again, they're letting them free range and move about. Of course, sometimes those get stolen by various tribal nations that are around here. Down here in Mexico, you're going to have more of the Corriente and some other Spanish stock. Again, you're still going to have some of the Longhorn or the Proto Longhorn. Those get stolen, those get traded. Primarily, when the English come over here, they're keeping lighter horses. They're very much managed. Same with their cattle. What's going on is their beef tend to be heavier. Tend to be heavier as you're getting into the Devons and some of the Ayrshire and the Jerseys that are coming over. Down here, again, rangier, and then the horses ultimately are either going to get stolen, get traded, they're going to wind up as Mustangs up in here. And then the English horses are going to be very well managed, rarely traded, and you're ultimately going to be having Justin Morgan and some other guys coming out with various American breeds.
Yes. And like I said, I have a whole book here of horse breeds. It's like a literal encyclopedia of them by Eyewitness, and we know most of us listening probably know what Eyewitness is. Um, I did find that Creek word or Muskogean word for horse, and I was wrong. It does not start with an I; it starts with an E. And forgive my pronunciation because I am not good with Native American languages. So the Creek. Let me read this quote from what's this book called? A Brutal Reckoning by Peter Cousins. Let's see. We have so the quote, an influx of cattle also endangered the deer population. The Creeks had welcomed horses, which they called Echoluco, meaning big deer in Muskogee. Most Creek men owned between 2 and a dozen horses, but they drew the line at cattle. what it's talking about horses and cattle is that these Creeks had captured these horses um, by yes, that's the book right there. They had captured these horses by or not captured, but got these horses by the Spanish, you know, basically letting a bunch of Mustangs roam the east. But cattle, a lot of these cattle were being traded, and they were really hurting Creek life on on a social dynamic because Creek society was maintained by what we call Micos, which are like these kind of like sort of like you could call them chiefs, but they are more or less like they oversee these places called Talwas, which are towns. And the Micos have somebody that's like bigger they report to. That's like a higher chief in like their clan, things of that structure. Anyway, but people there wasn't a lot that separated these people by anything except their birth and their relation. And so when a lot of these people are just simply able to acquire cattle, it just like we see with like the Indo-European society, the people with the more cattle are able to, pull more influence. And so we're going to see, people essentially that are not of like high stock have a lot of sway in Creek society. It's also going to basically make them more like the white man and the European because they're going to be having these what become little herds to farms to full on plantations. And when I mean plantations, yes, I mean plantations. The Creek Indian William Weatherford, not William Weatherford, I think it's William McIntosh. He has a summer home and a normal home, and his summer home is down near Pensacola, where he runs a plantation. And yes, like idea plantation, you're correct. It's got everything on it that you would think a plantation does. So anyway, where I was going with that is that the horses were fine because it allowed ease of access when in regards to the natural native lifestyle, which was essentially you grow your corn and your maize in the summer, spring, summer. Uh, I believe they also fought wars at that time. They would raid things like that. But in winter, the fall and winter time, the men would go off to hunt, and the horse is going to allow for an ease of transportation and going to these places and bringing back game because when you're on foot you can only carry so many deer or bear tied to these sticks. When you got like we said, you can have up to 2 to 12 horses. That's so much more animals you can bring back to your town. Thus more food is going to lead to a surplus of population, and that's going to also be a dwindling in the animal population because they're being hunted more. Also combined with the deer market for things like deerskin gloves, hats, things like that. It's really going to eat into the animal population of Eastern North America, all thanks to horses.
Right. And this is simultaneously going on with if horses are a single technology, livestock themselves are another technology. And so, depending on the propensity of the tribal nation and how they wanted to approach the idea of livestock, they had a technology now that allowed them to produce meat. So, they didn't even have to chase protein, but they could raise that and produce livestock. And the going into the new world was a radical shift beyond what we can understand. And you can almost see in real time how technologies are being adopted and how they are changing what for lack of a better term were less technological people groups.
Yes, and could you give me like a minute? I need to go and do something real quick, and I'll be right back. I hate to do this, but I got to do this real quick. If you want to keep
Yeah,
kind
you're
of going
good.
on
You're
about
good.
horse breeds, talk about Morgan, things like that, and I'll be back.
That'd be fine. All right. So for anybody that's watching right now, one of the things that you can jump into and do with horses and early livestock that was going on here in the States, there's a place called the Livestock, if I can ever learn how to type, the Livestock Conservancy. Now, what these guys do is they're real big on trying to make sure that we still keep the various lines that were bred here in the States, whether they came from different areas or whether they were founded here in the States, and make sure that we have those available in the future. Heritage breeds are the big thing. If you've ever heard that before, they've got a whole list of everything from poultry to beef cattle. At one point, they were running horses on here. I'm not sure that they still have those. Let's see. Okay, so they do still have the horses. They're listing them here under their livestock area. So, list of horse breeds. Oh, I thought I just clicked on that. Let's see. Okay, so going in here, it tells you the various types, and then they normally have it. Are they going to say? So that's interesting. Some of these links are going to be talking about American breeds. Some of them aren't. The American Cream is a fun horse in that it is the only draft horse to have been bred here in the States, unless you want to talk about Belgians. You can make an argument that the American Belgian, or excuse me, the horse that's commonly referred to in the U.S. as a Belgian is a distinctly American breed, because what happened is that we took basically three different Belgian breeds, and it's more or less codified right now into a particular type of horse. So you can make the argument that the Belgians in America are a distinct breed. But then the big draft horse here in the States is going to be, or that's a state breed, is going to be the American Cream. White horse, pink nose. I have not worked these guys. I've heard nothing but good things about them. The white color for me throws me off a bit. I tend not to like horses that have too much white in them. It's not so much an aesthetic thing as I worry about the pink noses and the sun, issues with sunburn and whatnot. I could be totally out to lunch on that one. But again, I don't have too much experience with the American Creams. The Rocky Mountain is a fun one because it actually comes from Kentucky rather than the Colorado and the actual Rocky Mountain areas. So this one is a lighter horse, and this is going to be an all-purpose utility horse. What happens is that you're over in colonial areas, you are over in settler areas as we're starting to move west. You don't have access to a great big draft. That's primarily going to be a post-Civil War thing with the Germans and some of the Eastern stock coming over. And then it's also, you just don't have access to the hay fields and the sustenance that a big old draft horse is going to need. So this Rocky Mountain horse, roughly 15 hands most of the time. A lot of them are going to be under 1,000 pounds, and he's going to be a riding horse. He's going to be a cart horse. He's going to be a light draft. Now we say light draft because now we're used to seeing big Belgians and proto drafts and post German drafts over west of the Mississippi. What he was doing at his time, the Rocky Mountain horse was doing, was actual draft work. It's just that eventually we would have these giant examples helping to dig dams, haul logs, and so on, that this guy's frankly not built for. He's built for a much smaller homestead identity than, again, the post-Civil War industrial identity of the giant draft.
I'm back. If you
Mountain
need to take,
pleasure. Go for it. I will
no.
say we have a hard out here, 20 minutes. But otherwise, yeah, go ahead, just jump in
no,
wherever
you're
you'd
good.
like.
You're good. I was actually here for a bit, and I wanted to let you know that I didn't just dip, but I was going to say something. You're talking about horses, and you're talking about these colors, and you said somebody didn't like a white horse. Well, what's fascinating is that the Lakota Sioux, to them, I believe it was the black horse was actually a preferred horse in like a ritual religious sense. But what's odd about that is that in Mongolia, that was a thing too. They preferred the black horse. And part of me wonders if it has to do with that ancient North Eurasian context that even though they weren't riding horses, but that they were picking them out of herds, interacting with them, and that there was some affinity towards a black horse. I just wanted to say it's either a black or a blue horse, but they represent the East, I believe, in in both Mongolian and Lakota uh like lore.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was actually unaware of that. Now I will say I've had a he wasn't pure white. I had a white flecked or excuse me, a white with brown flecked Arabian at one point. But that's the whitest horse. That's the whitest horse I had. Now he was a great riding horse, but obviously I couldn't get him under harness. So
My grandfather, the same one I was talking about, the 8 horse meet, he actually had a white Arabian, and I believe it threw him off one time, and that's back like in the 80s.
yeah, they are. So the one I had, he was when I got him. Oh, he might have been over 20 years old when I had him, and still he was ready to go, very high spirited. I like that in a saddle horse, but then when I'm working drafts, I the colder the better. As long as they'll put in a good day of work, the colder the horse, the better under harness.
Interesting. See, I don't have any really like the I've rode a horse before, but never like what I call it free riding. I've always it's more like just riding on one in the sense of like just sitting on one while something pulls it. I would love to actually free ride a horse one day. I feel like I have the build for it. Being a short kind of jockey esque guy. Um, I was
A
gonna
lope,
say, oh, go ahead, go
a,
ahead.
a lope or a gallop on a good horse is it's indescribable for me at least. I'm not the best communicator, but it is.
Well,
Words can barely touch what goes on when you're riding a fast horse that wants to run.
well, I'm under the impression that when we travel around in cars, we're basically blocked off from the world. You're not feeling the air, but I have this idea that at least like when I drive like a four wheeler or a golf cart, there's something more about like you actually are controlling this thing. There's something more there. It's more real. It feels like when you drive a car, you're driving a machine. You're just like, press a button, do this. There's not much life to it. But when you're moving and it's not so much moving like this like Fahrenheit 451 speed of where like you're just zooming everywhere, uh you appreciate the ride more. You appreciate whatever you're doing, especially if it's a beautiful day. I did actually own a horse though at one time. It was a pony, and that's back when we had the farm. And I was too stupid of a little kid to try to ride him because he was a Shetland, and eventually he got sold for chicken nuggets, is what I've always been told, and I don't know how true that is.
So you guys were trading with them McDonald's with the lion meat,
So maybe that's
right?
maybe that's how some people got successful in the fam. I don't know. But
Fair enough.
I was gonna say though, what was I gonna say about the history? Like, I know you were talking about different breeds of horses when I left. Um, I, could you maybe tell me a little bit about once these? I know kind of like, oh, like a lot of these horses are kind of like European mixes and matches. But can you kind of tell me sort of like when the first like American breeds of horses start to form? I don't know if you were saying that when I was gone or not. Talk about the American cream and all that, but like what's like by the time of like the American Revolutionary War, do we have distinct breeds in America that have been bred here?
By the time of the Revolutionary, the oldest one that I'm aware of, and probably the most popular, legitimately American horse breed, is going to be the Morgan. That might have been pre-Revolution. Let's see, but I'm not actually sure on that. The big thing with horses in the U.S., a lot of the older breeds, they're they've more or less disappeared, or at least been retyped. And part of that disappearing was post Civil War. We go out now and we see heavy horses, and the Amish are still working them. And we say, well, that's what we've always done, and that's not remotely true. The heavy horses didn't come over until post Civil War, and then that was um, a lot of it was due. A lot of it was due to more Germans coming over, more Poles coming over, and it just became more feasible to work the horses than to work oxen. Prior to the Civil War, the primary draft animal in the States was actually oxen. They didn't have to. They moved slower, but they weren't relying on one animal to do it all. And they didn't have access to a lot of the heavier horses. Now your Clydesdale and Shire coming out of the UK, those were actually built not for draft work. They can do some draft work, but those were primarily built for carriages. And so they were the semi trucks of their time. The Morgan, I'm trying to look here to see if it has. Well, I'm not seeing it. And then I'm trying to remember too. What was Traveler? Wasn't that Lee's horse? Was Traveler?
Yes. I'm not really aware of what breed Traveler was. I want to say he might have been maybe a I want to come out on a limb and say Tennessee Walker, but I could be just making BS up.
You might be right. Okay, so Morgan, yeah, so tracing it back just after the Revolutionary War. And so it comes out, everybody traces it back to Figure, and he was born in Massachusetts in 1789. So that's the foundation sire. He was born in 1789, probably didn't even start breeding until 3 years later. Matter of fact, 3 years later, he was given to Justin Morgan. Justin Morgan ends up breeding him, and I want to say, without reading all this live on stream, I want to say he bred him to 3 different mares and ended up eventually codifying that breed and saying what he wanted to do with those horses, which was light draft work and then just a good riding horse. The Tennessee Walker, I can't remember. That might be a late 19th century breed, but I might be wrong on that one. And then you got Missouri Foxtrotters. Let's see. Tennessee Walking Horse. No, I'm sorry. It's, late 18th century it began developing. Other breeds were later added. Okay, no, I was halfway right. So the foundation sire was born in 1886 on that guy. And then they had the Breeders Association was formed about 50 years later in 1935. So that's Tennessee Walker, Tennessee Walking Horse, and then Missouri Foxtrotters. One of the big things that the states did is that they started codifying, they started focusing on gaited horses. So your Foxtrotters and your Tennessee Walkers, and gaited riding became a big thing in the States. And that's just, when I say gaited, it's a different walk. It's a different walk. A lot of folks find it easier to ride than your horse with a standard gait, which would be your Arabians, your quarter horses. Oh, there's an American breed for you, the quarter horse. Let's see. So Foxtrotters. Early 19th century was Foxtrotters. So again, post Civil War. The quarter horse is a sticky one in that that's arguably the oldest after the Morgan. But the quarter horse is almost, I'm going to piss people off. It's almost like the cur dog in that its origins are less rigid than a lot of the other horses, and it's sort of just developed, and once they had an actual breed that they liked, then they had quarter horses. Once they had a consistent ability to breed the horses they liked, that was the quarter horse breed.
I was gonna say real quick, I
Yeah.
looked up Traveler. He was an American saddlebred.
Okay. Fair enough. So, I mean, the argument on Wikipedia is that they started in the 1600s. And so this is going back into the point where breeds are almost a 19th and 20th century thing. Before that, there was a focus, whether it was dogs, horses, cattle, there was a focus a lot of times on type. And so then various neighbors would have various types and they would breed, but eventually you would get into the breed books.
Yeah, and that seems like to me like a big thing is like we have to think of at the time when they were doing this stuff. It wasn't exactly like a oh we don't they didn't have like DNA genetics, and that everything was being done on a physical handheld level. So you got to think about these breeds were they were intentionally being created, but it involved a lot of logistics behind it. Like, this wasn't something being done like on a computer. This was we want to make bigger horses, bigger draft horses. We have to like, breed, several of these different pairs and individuals we think are good for each other and kind of keep this thing going for years and years. And then, finally that's how you get like a species created.
Right. You had to be lucky enough to know somebody that had something along the sort of what you wanted out of your horse. So it wasn't so much that, oh, I'd like to breed to Morgan as much as it was, well, I'd like to find a horse that's about 15 hands and that can pace or that can pull or whatever. But the big thing too is that if we come back to the map, you almost can't overstate the difference in agricultural types and the way in which they farmed and the way in which they managed livestock between the Spanish and then the English. Eventually, it would be into the Germans as well, coming through Pennsylvania and then up into the greater Midwest. But the two big splits in the U.S. between horses and livestock in general are going to be the Spanish and then the English. And those are two very different approaches because even the Spanish approach is arguably different than the continental approach. And so if we said that the continental was a more Germanic understanding, that's going to be closer to the UK and how the English and their various areas were doing it than the Spanish themselves. The Spanish kind of did their own thing. And so it's when you start teasing out the lines in the US, all three areas definitely played a unique role in that, which eventually became the storied parts of American livestock and American heritage and American critters. But on that note, we've got a little bit of a hard out. So if you want to put a bow on this and do a little bit of shilling, where can people find you, and what do we want to look forward to in the future?
Well, so to start with, you can find me on Twitter at Otto Wolf Helmson. It's a capital O and a capital W. You can find me on Substack, and I always have to pull this up. Give me a second. You can find me on Substack at autohawker.substack.com. What to expect from me right now is I will be launching my second episode of the Creek War series um, here in about the next 2 to 3 weeks. Expect that. I also have a surprise series being planned. There's two of them actually. One of them is going to be a lot more simple. The other one's going to be a lot more long term, like the Creek War. Expect a finish of Rhodesia. I'm just waiting on Peter to get it freed up so he can do that. And expect Substack writings to be coming out. I was something I always say this in every video that I was doing, and I fell off on because of something that happened in real life. And now that that's over, I should be back to writing. And it's just more of a matter of what can I think that is worthy to write about.
Yep, fair enough. Hey, so stick with me here for a second. Otto, we're going to take stuff offline because we're going to try and prep some stuff for you guys in the future. Maybe dig a little bit more into this horse thing. We're going to go the hound route, not only because of the amount of dogs and canines that were formed here in the States and our history here in the States, but going all the way back to the very beginning of this stream, Europe is very much the people of the horse and the hound. And the more we can focus on that and bring light to it and get into the history of that, hey, that's all the better. So potentially we'll be doing Molisars and American curs and just how Europe interacted with the dog. Again, that was very different between the different countries and even between the regions here in the States. I love that you brought up the plot earlier. So we're going to try and dig into that in the future. You can find me over on Twitter. It's Wander Mr. Panda. And other than that, I'm not fancy enough to do Substack or anything, but maybe one day. So Otto, it was great having you on. I appreciate everybody streaming.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Have a good evening, everybody. We're out.